In this video, we're going to be going over how to use the data that we just extracted from the database to be able to create a Marimekko chart in PowerPoint. Just a reminder, this section is extra credit, and if you instead choose to turn in a table that looks like this, you will still get full points. But we're going to be looking at how we can take the table that we were just able to extract in Excel that came out to look something like this, and then turn it into a full-fledged Marimekko. Marimekko graphs are excellent, as you can see just from looking at this, because they can quickly tell you what portions are they use space to tell you where the most amount of something is. Like, it can very quickly see that batteries and materials are taking up the majority. As you can see here with this graph, because of the visual layout, it allows you to display categorical to categorical relationships really well. A lot of big strategy firms will use Marimekko charts to do a lot of analysis, and they'll pay for proprietary software to create these types of charts. However, we're going to be going over how to use this and how to create this chart in base PowerPoint, so you do not need any proprietary add-ins. And we're also going to be doing it in a way that, as you notice, if I copy this chart over here, it automatically will scale as I change the size, which is very nice for what so we don't have to keep making modifications to it. But let me delete these two slides, and we'll create a new slide. Since Marimekkos oftentimes are very detailed charts, because they're such detailed charts, you won't always have a key takeaway section, and it's common for a slide to be filled up with just a Marimekko because of how much data they convey. So we'll just be using one content area for this slide, for this Marimekko. But let's get started. So if we go back and we go over here, this was our cost analysis data that we had. And see, so we can go ahead, we put that into this pivot table. I'm going to save these results. We'll be manipulating this going forward. First, let's bring up this slide from the previous lecture we did. I don't know why I keep getting an error on Zoom. But if we go back and we look at a Marimekko chart, we'll see that we want to start out with the table that looks like this, and then we want to get it into this format right here, and that'll translate into this chart. So each row is actually going to be a column, and then each column is going to be a row when we translate this. And for our sake, I think it'll be easiest to display it by machine. If we have machine as the different columns, and then we have the different products as the different rows. So we already have it in that format where it's like this. So right now we are getting the totals of cost. I'm going to change this value field just so it's not giving us a calculation, but we just have the totals. We'll keep this as values. So now everything lines up really quickly. I want to see, it'd be best if we ordered these. from, let's look. We want to order these from greatest to least. I didn't do that in this chart over here, but ideally what we'd want is actually batteries to be on the bottom since they're the biggest cost, and then followed by, I'm sorry, we don't want materials to be on the bottom, and then followed by speakers and so forth. So first, let's look at which one is the biggest. That is materials. So we'll have materials come first. I'll do this. Materials, then after materials, we would want batteries. Batteries is the second biggest. Now, keep looking, then we get microchips, speakers, screens, circuit boards, and finally wires as the smallest. Let's bring our rows back over. And now if we look over here, which one is the biggest? We see number 2 is the largest. So what I want to do is I will want to, basically I want to place 1 at the bottom of these. So quickly move these around. Why don't I just open this onto a new sheet? So now we almost have this table. What we want to do is now calculate out these percentages. That is supposed to be 3. So I can go ahead and I can just take each one of these and divide it by the grand total, and that will give us our percentages. And one special thing with working with a Marimekko is we're not going, just in terms of formatting the bottom axis, we aren't going to be able to use percentages. We're going to have to use whole numbers. We'll come back to that. But this gives us our percentages for each of the machines. We can really quickly see that these are ordered right. And I'll do the same thing over here just to make sure that that these are ordered in the right way. Some of this. So I'm just creating percentages over here. And now just by looking at these numbers, you can see that we do have all of these ordered in the proper manner. So now that I have our data table set up, let's return to the reference slide. So here's what we're going to do is for each one of these rows, we are going to make 3 rows. And so for like the first row, we want it to go from 0 until its percentage. And then we're going to have this third row in here, and that's just going to be a midpoint for our data label. And then for our next row, we are going to start that we're going to start that where the previous row ended, and when we're going to end it, where we're going to end it by taking how much of a percentage this makes and adding it on to where we started with the previous row, and then keep a midpoint for the same reason. So for instance, as you see in this graph, segment A starts at 0 and then it goes all the way to 48 and it stops. And then segment B will start at 48 and it'll go all the way to 92 because it's adding on an additional 43%, and then it'll stop at 92, and then the rest goes to 100. So let's see if we can emulate that. We're going to want each one of our rows here and I'll label this machines, or actually I'm going to insert a column to the left just so we can keep track of this. Machines, and so we want to have 3 rows per machine. So this is all machine 2, machine 3, and machine 1, and this is going to be our percent. And so this is going to start at 0, and then this is going to be equal to our percent right here. This is just going to start at the same place, and then this is going to be equal to the start plus this percent. And then the same thing here. And this is simply going to end at 100, so we can hard code that in. And then we want to get the averages of we want to get the midpoint between these two numbers, so I can just use this average function to give me where our midpoints are going to be. Okay, so now I have that. I'll add these columns in, and then I want to populate, as if we're looking back here, I'm going to populate this row 3 times for machine 2. So that's 3 times I populated that row. Then I'm going to populate the next row 3 times again. And then I'm going to populate the next row 3 times again. And lastly, we want to have this row of just zeros. I'll explain that in a minute. Title. So the element why we're adding that row is if you look back here and you look at these, the way that I keep this so that it automatically merges is these titles are not actually titles, but they're data labels. And so I just have another stack that's on top of these other stacks, but it has 0 value. And then I use the data labels for that invisible stack. I use that to create the segment titles. So that's why we have this additional column that we're putting here. And then finally, I'm going to have this last column that's just going to be called vertical lines. And what we're wanting to do here is every time there's a change between 2 of the different segments, we're going to have a vertical line from 0 to 1. So we see we go from 2 to 3. So at 2, it's going to start at 0, then it's going to go to 1. And then from 3 to 1, same thing. We're going to start at 0 and then go to 1. And the reason for this is you'll see this later, but what that is doing is it's drawing this line these 2 lines right here so that we get separation between them. Okay, but now I have everything that I will need to create our data for our Marimekko. Let me return to PowerPoint. Now you can create this graph in Excel as well, and it might seem easier to create in Excel. I like to keep my graphs in PowerPoint though, because if you do not create the graph in PowerPoint and you create it in Excel, the only way to edit the graph in PowerPoint is if you have access to the Excel file. So for instance, if I were to make this graph in Excel right now, and then I just copy the graph into PowerPoint, that would work. But then if I emailed that PowerPoint to somebody and they tried to edit the graph, it would break because it couldn't access my Excel file. And so I just find it a best practice to create them in PowerPoint. I'm going to click on here to insert a chart, and then I'm going to go down to the area, and I'm going to go to 100% stacked area. And I'll bring this up. Let me go back to Excel to copy our data. Now, one important thing, I have this machine column here for reference. I'm going to delete that so we don't accidentally copy it in. But I'll then copy all of our pre-formatted data. Here, I'm going to make sure I don't copy any of the formatting. And then I am going to, we'll get back to vertical lines. But I am going to paste it in like that. And you can already see that it's starting to look somewhat on the right lines. So you're probably going to have a different date that comes in here. Make sure you go down and click on date axis. And as you can see, we want to make sure that our date range is from 10 all the way to 49, and this is 100 days, so that we have it split across 100%. I'll just show you what it looks like if it's something different than that. So just make sure this is there. We'll change this. We want it to maybe every 5 days. Instead of a date, we're just going to have a number without any decimal places, and we'll come back to formatting that. And there you can already see that we have the beginnings of our Marimekko. So now we're going to go ahead and add in those extra vertical lines that we had. So we'll go back to edit data. I'll include the vertical lines. I'll go to chart type. I'll go to combo. This is where things can become weird. Make sure that each one of these is 100% area. And then just for right here, we'll want to do scatter plot and make sure it's not on the secondary axis. And that gives us a couple points here. We'll go ahead and format these. I just want to make these white. So we'll have some white lines running up there that will be able to divide things for us. Then I'll just go ahead and clean up just these certain lines that we have right here. So if I click on this dot, I'll just make sure that that doesn't have a line. And then I'll click on this dot and make sure there's no line right there. So I just have those two vertical lines. And then I also want to get rid of these markers. So I'll go over here to markers and I'll change it to no fill. Make sure, or let's make sure we hit all of them. Oops, we want to keep the lines. We'll go to markers, no fill, and then no border, which turns them invisible. And then we're going to go through each one of these areas, and we're just going to get each one of these areas an outline just to help better break things up so we can see between them. Okay, now we have the basics of the area distribution. For each one of these, let me just make sure this is one. I'm just noticing this looks a little bit thick. There we go. Now everything is the same size, except for this one also looks a little bit thick. And you're just going to have to play around with this to make sure that everything lines up. Okay. Maybe make sure that is also at 1. We'll make sure that's at 1. Okay, and we are all good there. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to move this legend that we have over to the right. Makes it a little bit easier to see. Going to get rid of titles and vertical lines because we don't need those. Then I'm going to go ahead and add our data labels. Actually, before we do that, let's come back to Excel. Let's change all of these to dollars because that's what we want represented in these boxes. So I go back to PowerPoint. I'm going to go to Edit Data. And then I'm just going to replace all these cells with dollars. Now I'm going to go to add data labels. And what you'll notice is it adds a data label. Remember how we had our 3 rows that we're looking at that we had to have for each segment? Well, this is why we added the 3 rows. But you see this is why we added the middle row, because we get data labels for row 1, data labels for row 2, and data labels for row 3. And we only really want data labels for the middle row. So before we do that though, let's first change the color of all of these to white and bold them just so they're a little bit easier to see. everything except for these zeros up here, which are our title. I'm just going to make them a nice red color so we know not to touch them. And then we have these labels. These are for our vertical lines, which we don't want, and we can just delete all these. So now we're going to go through and just clean this up. Make sure that you are only selecting one at a time, otherwise you can clear out an entire series. And then we want to get rid of all these in the middle. Okay, this gets a little bit tricky, but I'll delete the one on the left, the one on the right, and on the left. Actually, I wonder if that was the right one to delete. Yeah, that. And whenever you're making charts like this, just remember you're an artist. And that's really the best way to think about this. You've done all your analysis, now you're just making it tell your story. Okay. Let's just make sure I'm deleting the right ones here. Doesn't look like this purple even has a segment, so I can just have that. And then I only want to keep that middle one for our labels. That's a little bit too small to fit in there, so I'm going to get rid of that one. Okay. Have that. Now for some of these values that spill over. What I'm going to do, since we can, is just move that out and unbold it. Actually, that's fine there. Let's see what happens when we bring this down. It looks like it fits in a little bit better, so why don't we just create everything? We'll make everything 11. That really gets on the small side. We usually want to avoid going below 12 with the text. But in this case, it does benefit the aesthetic, so we'll go ahead and change these to 11. Just make sure 11, 11, 11, 11, 11, 11. Okay. And now we're going to just do something a little bit tricky here. We don't want the title. However, we do want a margin up here, and if I delete the title, I'll get rid of that margin. So I'm simply just going to make the title white, or whatever the color of the background is. And if you do have like a background that's a different color, just make it that color, or experiment with making it possibly translucent. Before I get to here, I'm gonna establish these as black. To bold these, I'm going to bold these data points, and I want to make them size 14 because that is going to be our labels. And then I'm going to move this right up against the line and call this machine. All right, let's make sure we're doing this right. This is machine 2. That's our first label. And then we'll move this right up against the line and call this machine 3, our second label. And then move this right up against the line and say it's machine 1. Or even, it could also be appropriate just to call this M1. But there is our Marimekko. The last thing we want to do is come down here to format axes, and we want to go to number, and then we want to add a format. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use parentheses and then add a percentage sign to it. This is just telling it add a percentage sign over it, but don't actually add a real percentage sign, just add the text as a percentage sign. So now I get percentages for each one of these, and this is on a 10 axis. So I'm just going to change this up here to 10, just so it keeps it consistent. I also notice that it has these grid lines that are kind of sticking out of it. I don't want those grid lines. So I'm going to go to add chart element, grid lines, more grid lines options, and just say no grid lines at all, just to make it more clean. And I believe that is everything. So we can go ahead and source where this data came from, and then I'm going to say that machine 2 processes most products with materials, and what is this? Batteries. Why don't we move? Let's move these a little bit farther away. Materials and batteries making up the greatest costs of goods sold, making up the greatest portion of costs of goods sold. Okay, and there we go. That is our Marimekko chart. So hopefully you found this to be helpful. Remember, if you do this, this is the extra credit assignment. You don't have to do this just to get the full credit, but if you made it this far, congratulations. This is probably one of the most advanced charts that you can build out in Excel. Marimekkos are very popular in strategy consulting, and just you can see they're very good at displaying categorical to categorical relationships, being able to use space. People pay lots and lots of money for tools that can make these, so having the skill to be able to do it without using one of those proprietary tools is very useful. But I hope you enjoyed this, and this concludes our assignment.